The pre-closing occupancy rider, they have called this mutually agreeable lease a pre-closing agreement now, and they've crossed off written lease here and here. I think they made a mistake by not crossing off written lease here. I don't like using either the pre-closing occupancy rider or the post-closing occupancy rider. For pre-occupancies, I don't like doing those at all. It's very risky. For post-closings, they're way more common than pre-closings, but for post-closings, I don't like this addendum because it doesn't have any spot to put a dollar amount for escrow. So if you've ever asked me about this addendum, I've probably recommended either not to use it, we create our own language to put in the contract, or we just draft a post-occupancy agreement that we have the parties sign even before we enter into contract. The other reason I don't like this addendum is that it says the contract is contingent upon the buyer and seller delivering to each other a mutually acceptable written lease. What if one of the parties doesn't agree to what's written and delivered? Then the contract's contingent upon that, so it stands that either party would be able to terminate the agreement. So I don't like that addendum, because if we're all in agreement that there's going to be a post-occupancy agreement, then let's figure out the amount of time the seller is going to stay there, the escrow amount, the rental amount, a penalty amount if there's going to be a penalty for them staying after the amount allotted to them. And we can write that into the additional terms that the parties shall execute that agreement and not make the contract contingent on it. The sale of buyer's property addendum didn't change much. They got rid of A and B, but it still operates the same way. Basically, you're going to put in this line here the date that the buyer has to sell their property by, and they have to give notice within 3 days of that date to the seller as to whether or not they're moving past this contingency or not. So if they are unable to sell their property by the date that's in here, then they need to make a move. They either need to cancel the contract or they need to extend this contingency. The problem that buyers agents and buyers always run into on this addendum is that they extend the closing date, but they don't extend the date for this contingency. Let's say the buyer's property is supposed to sell tomorrow, and we find out that we need to give an extension to the buyer on that. And the date that is in this line here is September 17th. If we don't also extend the date on here, then the buyer only has until Monday to figure out whether or not they're going to cancel this contract. And if they have to extend the sale of their property until next Friday, well, they're still not going to know whether or not it's closed by Friday. So you have to make sure that you extend this contingency here if you're including this in the contract and you need an extension. This is the rider that is referred to in paragraph 8B2. Now, if the loan approval is conditioned on buyer's ability to sell their property, if you have this addendum included in the contract, then the buyer can obtain loan approval. If you don't have this addendum, the buyer can't obtain loan approval until their house is sold. And then the last addendum they updated is the backup contract. They took out the 5 p.m. deadline, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And then they added this about deposits if they have been paid. When you have a backup contract, you're executing a regular as-is contract with closing date, inspection period, everything. And you're referencing the backup contract on the addendum page. And then this addendum actually changes the effective date of the contract to the date that the seller tells the buyer that they've terminated the previous contract. Then that is the same date that the backup contract becomes effective. So the inspection period, the loan approval period, and everything starts operating from that date, not the date that you execute the contract and the backup contract addendum. So it delays everything. So you shouldn't have a deposit being paid unless you've checked off that the deposit is made with the offer. So if you've checked off that the deposit is made 3 days after the effective date, it's not until the backup contract is actually in effect.